In the 1970s, an American aerospace titan achieved the impossible. They built an aircraft so technologically advanced it could literally land itself in zero-visibility fog while every rival jet on Earth was grounded. Pilots called it the finest plane they'd ever flown. Passengers called it the quietest cabin in the sky. By all accounts, it was a flawless masterpiece of engineering. But here's the problem. This masterpiece didn't dominate the aviation industry. Instead, it nearly bankrupted one of America's most powerful companies, and the fallout didn't stop there. It destroyed the career of a Japanese prime minister and triggered a massive multi-million-dollar bribery scandal that shook governments across 3 separate continents. So how did an airplane so utterly perfect turn into a global geopolitical disaster? To understand how that's possible, you need to go back to the late 1960s. Boeing had just unveiled the 747, this massive 4-engine giant that could carry 400 passengers across oceans. It was a marvel. But for most airlines, it was simply too much airplane, too many seats to fill on a Tuesday morning flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, too much fuel burned on routes that didn't need that kind of range. Airlines wanted something in between, a wide-body jet that felt spacious and modern like the 747, but was sized for the routes they actually flew every day. There was a catch, though. Federal regulations at the time severely limited how far a twin-engine aircraft could fly from the nearest diversion airport. That meant 2 engines couldn't legally cross most oceans, so the answer had to be 3, a Tri-J. 2 companies stepped forward to build one, McDonnell Douglas with the DC-10, and Lockheed, a company famous for spy planes and fighter jets, with absolutely zero experience building commercial airliners at this scale. What Lockheed proposed wasn't just competitive, it was decades ahead of anything else in the sky. The L-1011 TriStar was engineered with an obsession that bordered on fanaticism, where McDonnell Douglas bolted their 3rd engine straight through the tail fin because it was simple and fast. Lockheed designed an elegant S-shaped duct that buried the engine inside the fuselage for cleaner aerodynamics and less drag. They introduced an automatic flight control system so advanced that the TriStar could fly a complete approach and landing in zero-visibility weather, something called Category 3B Auto Land. Pilots at other airlines would be sitting in fog-bound terminals watching L-1011s glide onto runways they couldn't even see. The cabin was nicknamed the Whisperliner because Lockheed engineered it to be the quietest commercial jet ever built. They moved the galleys below deck and installed custom elevators so flight attendants could send meals up without cluttering passenger space. They used direct lift control to eliminate the bumpy, stomach-dropping descents passengers hated. Every single design choice prioritized perfection over speed to market. But perfection needs an engine, and the engine Lockheed chose would set off a chain reaction that no amount of engineering brilliance could survive. McDonnell Douglas played it safe. They designed the DC-10 to accept engines from General Electric or Pratt & Whitney, whichever the airline preferred. Flexibility, options, fast production. Lockheed took the opposite approach. They signed an exclusive deal with Rolls-Royce for a brand new engine called the RB211. This wasn't an existing power plant with minor upgrades. Rolls-Royce was building something revolutionary from scratch, featuring fan blades made from a cutting-edge carbon fiber composite they called high-fill, lighter than titanium, theoretically more efficient than anything flying. Lockheed bet the TriStar's entire identity, its aerodynamics, its fuel numbers, its delivery schedule, on this single unproven engine from a single manufacturer across the Atlantic. Then, during testing, engineers fired a dead chicken into the spinning high-fill blades at simulated flight speed. The blades didn't flex, they didn't absorb the impact, they shattered. Rolls-Royce scrambled to redesign using conventional titanium, but the heavier blades threw off the weight calculations, the fuel burn projections, and the development timeline. Costs spiraled out of control. And in February 1971, Rolls-Royce did something that seemed impossible for a company that had been building engines since 1904. They declared bankruptcy. Because Lockheed had designed the TriStar exclusively around the RB211, they couldn't swap in a General Electric or Pratt & Whitney engine the way you'd change a light bulb. The airframe, the pylons, the nacelles, the entire thrust architecture was married to one engine that now belonged to a bankrupt company. Lockheed's production line went completely silent. Workers stood next to half-finished TriStars with nowhere to mount the engines. The British government was forced to nationalize Rolls-Royce just to keep it alive, 1975, and Lockheed went to the United States Congress begging for a $250 million emergency loan guarantee. The Senate vote passed 49 to 48, one vote. A single senator's decision stood between Lockheed and total collapse. Meanwhile, McDonnell Douglas saw the opening and drove straight through it. The DC-10 entered service in August 1971. The TriStar wouldn't fly commercially until April 1972, more than a year behind. Airlines that had been waiting for the L-1011 panicked. If Lockheed goes under, who honors the warranty? Who supplies spare parts? Carriers cancelled their TriStar orders and bought DC-10s instead. And here's the part that still haunts aviation historians. The DC-10 that captured the market had a catastrophic design flaw in its outward opening cargo door. That flaw would eventually kill 346 people on Turkish Airlines Flight 981 in 1974. The safer airplane, the TriStar, the one that could land itself blind, sat in assembly bays waiting for engines while the dangerous one filled order books around the world. But the story of the L-1011 doesn't end with a production delay and a lost market race. What Lockheed did next makes the Rolls-Royce bankruptcy look like a minor inconvenience. By the mid-1970s, Lockheed was hemorrhaging money. Every TriStar they built was sold at a loss because they'd never reached the production volume needed to drive costs down. The domestic American market had been devoured by the DC-10. Lockheed needed international orders desperately, and they turned their attention to Japan, where All Nippon Airways was deciding between the TriStar and the DC-10 for a major fleet expansion. Lockheed didn't just send salesmen, they built a covert bribery network through a shadowy Japanese fixer named Yoshio Kodama, a man with deep ties to organized crime and right-wing political networks. Lockheed funneled approximately $3 million in secret payments to Japanese government officials. The money didn't go to mid-level bureaucrats. It went to the top. Prime Minister Kakue Tanaka personally received payments to ensure All Nippon Airways selected the TriStar. The deal worked. ANA ordered 21 L-1011s. But in 1976, a series of US Senate hearings into multinational corporate corruption ripped the lid off everything. Lockheed's chairman Dan Horton and President Carl Kochian were hauled before the Senate Subcommittee on Multinational Corporations. Under questioning, Kochian admitted to the payments but insisted they were standard practice in international business. He called them necessary to compete. The Senate called them illegal. Horton and Kochian were both forced to resign. In Japan, the fallout was seismic. Prime Minister Tanaka was arrested in July 1976 and charged with accepting 500 million yen in bribes. The scandal consumed Japanese politics for over a decade. Tanaka was eventually convicted in 1983, though he appealed until his death in 1993. The Lockheed bribery scandal didn't just embarrass two countries, it directly led to the passage of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States in 1977, the first law explicitly criminalizing bribery of foreign officials by American companies. It rewrote the rules of international business permanently, and the TriStar orders that Lockheed bought with those bribes weren't nearly enough to save the program. Lockheed's own accountants had calculated from the beginning that the company needed to sell 500 L-1011 TriStars to break even on development costs. 500 aircraft just to get back to zero. They never came close. Total production over the life of the program was 250, exactly half. Every single TriStar represented a financial loss. In 1981, Lockheed officially announced the program was finished. The last L-1011 rolled off the line in Palmdale, California in 1983. The financial devastation didn't just end a product line, it rewired Lockheed's corporate DNA at the molecular level. The company made a vow that it has kept for over 40 years. Never again would Lockheed build a commercial passenger aircraft. They pivoted entirely to military contracts, defense systems, and aerospace technology. In 1995, they merged with Martin Marietta to form Lockheed Martin, today the largest defense contractor on the planet, generating over $65 billion in annual revenue, none of it from commercial aviation. The L-1011 TriStar is remembered by pilots and engineers as perhaps the most beautifully designed commercial aircraft ever built. It had the lowest hull loss rate of any wide body of its generation. Airlines that operated it loved it. Passengers who flew on it still talk about how quiet and smooth it was, and yet the company that created this masterpiece was so damaged by the experience that it abandoned abandoned the entire industry forever. The question nobody has fully answered is whether the TriStar failed because Lockheed chased perfection or because the industry wasn't ready to reward it. 40 years later, every modern airliner uses Autoland systems Lockheed pioneered. Composite materials that destroyed the L-1011 are now standard in every engine flying. The advanced automation concepts the TriStar pioneered paved the way for the sophisticated flight decks of modern airliners. Everything Lockheed got right about the future of aviation eventually came true. It just came true for everyone except Lockheed. If that story rewired how you think about what it actually costs to build something perfect, you'll want to see what happened when McDonnell Douglas tried to cut corners on the plane that beat the TriStar. That story is right here.